It turned out that the nerds were right. Will Cooper, the US president, was warned by his friends Sam Brenner and Ludlow that aliens were coming to Earth in the form of classic video game characters. He sought their help, but found none. Mysteriously, Brenner and Ludlow had vanished from this universe, and so, the president sought out 2 other nerds that could be of assistance. Sheldon Lee Cooper and Maurice Moss, who were both working at the government, were called up and given the necessary gear to take on their pixelated foes. However, Sheldon and Moss had a side bet going on over who could get the high score in pixels, seeing how each defeated enemy would grant them points. They decided they'd keep tally of their own points and see who got the higher score by the end of it all.
Hello there, Ribbit here. I would start off sounding nice like I usually do, but this is serious business. I will be advocating for why Maurice Moss would get the high score if he and Sheldon Lee Cooper were in the classic Adam Sandler movie, Pixels. Let's start with the easiest one, Pac-Man. Sheldon is terrified of driving. Moss has never shown such a fear. The rules of driving aren't exactly going to apply, since they are fighting Pac-Man, so even if Moss isn't an expert on driving, he'll still be in a better spot than Sheldon is. In order to beat Pac-Man in the movie, you needed to take risks. When somebody was cowardly, he was the second one out, and that's because the first one tried to befriend Pac-Man. Then there's Centipede. Moss has been seen playing first-person shooter games before, and has shown to have incredible precision, like when he managed to stab a screwdriver around his fingers without snagging himself at all. Five Finger Filler is a surprisingly hard game to master. Sheldon's never really shown impeccable aim as far as I know. He's played Halo, but that's about it. Then, Danky Gang. Moss has actually taken on similar obstacles before, but I guess that leads into my biggest point. As an aficionado of the IT crowd, I own all of the DVDs, and so I know that in them you can see Moss, Roy, Jen, and everyone not just playing video games, but being inside video games, whether it be old Amiga type games, SNES games, or Facebook desktop games. Moss may not play games all the time, but he's been inside of them, or at least he's dealt with these kinds of threats. There's nothing proving that these are a dream, so if you give Sheldon that flash thing, Moss gets this stuff. So what had he done? Well, he's partaken in Mortal Kombat, showing much greater hand-to-hand combat skills than Mr. Cooper. He's shown to platform around episode-themed environments, dodging foes very reminiscent of the Pixels cast. And he's even, eaten a Cuke can whole. Oh, and in one of them, Renum gets slammed down on so hard that it destroys Renum Industries, which is a skyscraper for the record. So, stronger than Sheldon. Even if Sheldon's faster, they're all in cars in one of them, and if he slips up during either of the other ones, he's toast. Moss could not only likely survive it, but he's dealt with those kind of obstacles before. Moss is a good bit more confident at his best. If Moss shows up in women's trousers, he's not going to be some socially awkward guy. He's going to be a planner, a guy who's totally fine with standing up to muggers. I know Pac-Man and muggers are different things, but that's still a less fragile mindset than Sheldon, who cries like a little kid when he takes too long to decide between an Xbox One and a PS4, and so would have to go back the next day. Speaking of which, Sheldon's terrible at making decisions, so he might end up overwhelmed when forced to make life or death decisions instantaneously. Heck, if something doesn't go his way, he'll probably throw a childish fit. Moss would do no such thing. He's a way more positive guy, and so would be much better at rolling with the punches. If you want proof that Moss is better with video games in deadly situations, he played a first-person shooter while there was a fire mere feet away from him. Sheldon can play a mean Master Chief, I'm sure, but not when there's a fire in the same room. Moss has also been seen with a gun and a saw before, so he's got some weapons at the ready beyond what the government is providing him. Not to mention, Moss has knowledge of chemistry, physics, technology, electronics, computing, and mathematics, as shown when he calculated the number of cigarettes Jen was smoking a day with little info. And in a second or so, this incredibly fast-working mind is further proven when he remembered the new emergency services number after hearing it just twice, which was 0118-999-8819-9119725-3. I may know it off by heart, but that's because I've watched the episode so many times. Simply put it, what good is knowing video games when the other has been inside them before, basically? And what good is being smarter when you're too immature and scared to do half the tasks presented to you? And the other is, at his peak, incredibly confident and a countdown master, who's here to drink milk and kick ass, and he just finished his milk.
Wow, Ribbit. Well argued. I have to say, you have thoroughly debunked all of my arguments before I had a chance to say them, and I have to forfeit. Bazinga! Sorry Moss, hate to do it to you, but this one's going to the Coop Man, and here's why. First off, I want to bring up intelligence. It's what they're both known for, but Moss seems to be slightly more dim-witted than Sheldon is. Usually, Moss's humor will involve him being oblivious, whereas Sheldon's comedy comes from him being very blunt and intelligent most of the time. I mean, he went to college when he was 11, and he invents some weird stuff like glow-in-the-dark fish. I'd say he's quite a bit smarter than Moss. Moss is the guy who, when there was a fire, tried to email someone to come help him. He decided to make up that Jen was dead when he was under pressure, and couldn't pick up on Jen's coughing to make him stop talking, even after he had explained previously what the coughing was for. Sheldon is a physicist. He's great with mechanics, and has much more pop culture knowledge than Maurice Moss. Hell, Sheldon has even made a death ray. Meanwhile, Moss is making ladders for moths, even though they can fly. But I understand that intelligence may not be as big a factor in this scenario, trying to get the higher score in pixels, considering Adam Sandler and Olaf weren't exactly geniuses and they still got by. However, Sheldon appears to be more into video games than Moss, who would be more interested in figuring out how the game console works. We usually see Sheldon playing games like Halo, whereas Moss very rarely plays video games. I recall Moss opting to not play Guitar Hero, and it can be assumed that most, if not all, of the game items in the office belong to Roy. Going back to Halo, Cooper's experience with it could help with shooting enemies during the all-out war, or a centipede. Moss's only experience with a gun is when he waved one around shouting, "I've got a bloody gun!" Sheldon's pop culture knowledge means he's going to better understand how to get the most points in these games, and as we saw in Pixels, if you're a military man instead of a nerd trying to fight Centipede, you're doomed. Also note that for these challenges, both Moss and Sheldon need to be active. They can't just sit down and play the games on the computer. Sheldon has been involved in some physical humor throughout the show, more so than Moss, which means he's likely to be able to better compete in Centipede, Donkey Kong, and the oncoming video game war. Sheldon has hopped around in ball pits, been punched in the face, and even once ran like the Flash. You'd think this kind of thing would be revealed to be a dream or a fantasy afterwards, but it just doesn't. So it could be that Mr. Cooper is hiding some untapped power from us. As for Pac-Man, Sheldon is good at driving, sure, but he does have a license, and by season 11, Amy taught him to drive, and got Howard out of the desert, albeit he was driving faster than he should have. We've never seen Moss drive, just Roy. Plus, Sheldon owns Miss Pac-Man, whereas Moss hasn't ever been seen actually playing Pac-Man. So, in every challenge in Pixels, Sheldon is going to know a lot more than Moss, and thus will perform better. But that's not all for Moon Pie. Sheldon has created actual functioning robots before, like Monty, so he could potentially build some help on the field in order to get a higher score than Moss, counting the points they get as his own. After all, not only do they have access to military weapons, but they have time in between each attack to prepare. In this downtime, Sheldon could potentially get the help of Leonard, Howard, and Raj, who are all intelligent in their own right. They'll be his Seamen! Moss getting help from Roy and Jen wouldn't help him nearly as much. Roy may know more about video games than Moss, but that just makes for one guy who knows video games well, against 4 nerds who love video games. You mentioned that Moss is calm in the face of danger, citing how calm he was during the fire, but Moss being calm so often is likely a result of him not completely understanding the gravity of the situation. But since this is Pixels, rest assured that a giant max headroom will explain the stakes to him, which would put him under intense pressure. To elaborate on times Moss has freaked out over small things, Moss failed to simply lie about Jen not being in, causing him to make up a lie about her being dead. He couldn't take a single insult without breaking down into tears, and he only got used to his friend Roy spitting insults at him for practice, but never showed to not cry when actual bullies made fun of him, instead resorting to threatening them with a gun. Moss was too nervous to explain why he was in the staff toilet when he got caught, so he just pretended to be part of the staff. And, during court, he couldn't even answer the simple question, "Your name is Maurice Moss, is it not?" Moss was most confident during the countdown contest, but that was because he was very confident in his ability to spell. He won't be as confident with video games because he has little experience with it. He's going to need to go to his happy place. Don't get me wrong, Sheldon is no brick wall when it comes to pressure, but I think he and Moss are very comparable here, and it's something both will need to overcome to save the world from Pixels. Don't worry, they still have the help of Eddie Plant and other military men with light cannons, so I'm not trying to say they both get destroyed because they're too scared. Finally, to really hammer in that the winner's throne for this Galaxy Grudge match is in fact Sheldon's spot, I bring up that Sheldon is far more cruel than Moss, and may even sabotage him with another one of his classic pranks. I would not put it past Sheldon to try something against Moss, even if the world is at stake, considering Sheldon has made death rays, and has gotten into moods where he's wanted to destroy the planet before. The wiki on Sheldon reads, Sheldon does not see fault in absolutely anything he does in his life, to such an extent that he doesn't think that, when he commits a serious crime, he is doing anything wrong. By the end of today, Egg and Moss's face will be in alignment, after Sheldon Cooper comes out victorious.
Your argument made me mad. I might just turn Darth and put on my I'm angry and I'm going to destroy the planet music. Wait. Oh no, that was a Big Bang Theory reference. Well, I have a few issues with your argument. First of all, Moss does not say bloody gun. He says he's got a ruddy gun. Moss would never use such vile language. His ears are not a toilet. Okay, but seriously, you bring up some strong arguments for Cooper, but I spotted a few things that I take issue with. First of all, Sheldon indeed is more of a gamer than Moss. Oh, I hate that I had to say gamer. But that doesn't mean Moss is without his experience in this area. When Moss gets paid, Roy tells Jen he's probably gone to Namco. I've been to the Namco in London. That place has Pac-Man everywhere. Considering Roy's Pac-Man shirt too, I think Moss has experience with the Dot Muncher. You can't be a nerd who likes video games and not know Pac-Man. If Moss goes to the very location that has Pac-Man everywhere and is owned by the company that he's the mascot of, yeah, he'll get by. I guess I'll also mention Moss's status outside of just Pac-Man game-wise. Moss literally considers a lovely lunch in the park, bringing a small TV with a controller attached to it and playing video games there. You can't brush off all the instances of Moss going to Namco, playing FPS games at work, and bringing televisions out to publicly game. Sure, Sheldon plays more games consistently, but that doesn't mean Moss is just a He-Man fan being brought in. Besides, you mentioned that they have free time. What's to stop Moss from researching the arcade games that he hasn't played? It might not work for all of them, but it's not like he's unable to research a little. Moss is a genius. He'd have little trouble deducing that kind of strategy. I'd say overall, the fact that Moss is likely going to be less determined to sabotage Sheldon is going to help him about as much as Sheldon being a bit of a dick helps him. Moss can put this time towards more productive things, which I believe he would do, being the more sensible one here. Time spent trying to sabotage Moss is time that Sheldon is wasting on petty games. Meanwhile, Moss is actually racking up a score and gaining knowledge. Also, if Sheldon is such a gaming expert, why did all of the research that he did ultimately lead him to deciding that the Xbox One was the better choice than the PS4? I mean, come on now. Next, Sheldon could create robots, but I have my doubts that they'll be able to deal with the sporadic behaviours seen in Pixel's creatures. Remember, many of these were flying around the city at high speeds, destroying everything in their path. Sheldon is a thinking, breathing human, so he could deal with this. But Sheldon would need some damn good robotic skills to create a robot that could deal with the creatures in Pixels. Sabotage is more likely in Sheldon's case too, but Moss has dealt decently with rivals specifically targeting before. -1 consistently got up in his grill, and Moss shook him off. Could Sheldon, make Moss guns malfunction? Of course he could, but the government would be pissed! You need to remember that they are being supervised by the military. Sheldon might get kicked out if he's causing too much trouble for the more sensible members of the gang. Who knows? Leonard might make a very funny, snarky comment, and they'll realise he'll probably not be a dick and he's also as smart as Sheldon. I love Roy and Jen, but yeah, they're certainly less helpful than Sheldon's friends. But that could backfire, because it does make Sheldon somewhat replaceable with other nerds with similar skill sets to him. Also, that driving Sheldon did was, not exactly up to par. He had to be told to get into one of the lanes, and once he began to drive quickly, Howard could not stop him. He's being talked to by others, and the government folks here, who may tell him what to do to try and help him. But he won't do that because of how confident he is, and the fact that Howard told him to slow down. He literally told Howard no, because he wasn't his dad. Sheldon is so stubborn, it's very likely he'd get in the way. There was a part of the movie where they all cornered Pac-Man. I can genuinely see all of them having surrounded Pac-Man, and then suddenly they realise that Sheldon isn't blocking one of the directions. Pac-Man will be able to leave that area, and thus would have another opportunity to use his power pellet later. Moss does what he's told, at least. One last thing. You talk about Moss's lack of confidence, which I agree with. But when I discussed his confidence, it was alongside Moss donning women's slacks. Is he still a guy who'd cry over insults like, "Them glasses is shit, innit? Ha! Far from it, Max! He loves to plan ahead and come up with strategies. He's got way more energy, and more importantly, he literally stood up to 2 grown men who were mugging an old lady. Sheldon would never do something like that. Game experience matters, but I'd argue that having the confidence and courage to stand up to things that are much stronger than you is just as important. This is where I think Roy and Jen would come in handy. They would know Moss is in a stressful situation and would encourage him to wear women's sacks on the battlefield. I think both will come out of this with their heads held high, but Moss I think will end up sitting on Sheldon's spot, the throne of the high score.
Sheldor's back online, and while Ribbit is AFK, I'm gonna take a shot at his points. I'll say Moss did play that first-person shooter, but that still remains one of 2 times he has played a video game on screen. And since we've seen Sheldon play different shooter games, and more often, I think we can assume he's better at them than Moss. I mean, if he's got a weekly night dubbed Halo Night, I think we can assume he plays quite a bit more of it than Moss. Also bear in mind that Hofstetter, Wolowitz, and Kufrapali are competing in Halo Night as well, and they're likely to help Sheldon. But I'll grant you that having experience playing shooters doesn't translate to real life. So maybe this is a moot point for both. Oh, bazinga! Actually, Sheldon and the gang regularly play paintball on weekends, which would translate well to Pixels. And Sheldon is even a decent strategist in paintball, so he could come up with nice tactics here. Then there's also his experience with every other game they're facing. You may be able to assume Moss plays Pac-Man, and I'll admit that off-screen he plays more games than I initially thought. But I can assume based on Sheldon generally playing games more and owning Miss Pac-Man in his home, before it got stolen, he has more experience with the game than Moss. Again, games are Sheldon's hobby, but Moss doesn't indulge in that hobby as much as Cooper. On Moss's Lonely Faces page, he lists that he likes Masters of the Universe, Tech Wars, Magic the Darkening, and Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Nothing really about video games. When Moss was asked what his hobbies were, he purposely left out video games. That's really where my main argument lies. Anything Moss can do, Sheldon can do better, with more experience and intelligence than Moss at his side. I'd still say that Sheldon's experience with driving is better than Moss never being seen driving a vehicle. Even if we don't trust Sheldon behind the wheel, he may just have his friends take care of this for him. Though if you don't want to count his friends' points as his own, I will say that I doubt Pac-Man is really going to change Sheldon's score that much if he fails it, since I'm pretty confident at him excelling in Centipede, Donkey Kong, and The War. So if Moss can drive better than Sheldon, and winds up winning Pac-Man, it won't be enough. Plus, Sheldon being really reckless and fast when he's driving could actually help him hit Pac-Man more, and be unpredictable. Another point I'd like to mention is about Moss's DVD feats. They don't actually happen in the show like Sheldon's Flash feat, and even then, those feats aren't as useful in Pixels because Moss isn't beating anyone up. He's using the special laser guns that can harm the aliens since nothing else seems to work. If Moss tries to use Mortal Kombat skills on Frogger, he'll probably lose his flipping hand. Unfortunate as that sounds. Not that any of this matters in the first place, because neither the Flash feat or the game feats can actually be considered in this debate. I never intended the Flash feat to actually mean anything, but you seem to rely a bit on the DVD feats. When it's my robot idea, I'm more so thinking Sheldon can make turrets to fire at Centipede, and blast enemies in the all-out war. Sheldon will be given access to military equipment, and so he'd likely have everything he needs to make this, assuming by this point he's brought in Howard, Leonard, and Raj to assist him. When it comes to the military replacing Sheldon, I highly doubt it. The more the merrier in this case. If they have more nerds, they have a better shot at stopping the alien invasion. Even if Sheldon causes trouble, I recall Eddie Plant got called out for cheating, and he actually nearly destroyed the world. But they still let him back on for the final battle, strapping him with a gun and all. So if Sheldon gets a little mischievous, I don't see them punishing him too harshly. Worst he'll get is some kid calling him a meanie, and then giving him the advice to pretend he's the guy and he doesn't want to die. I also think, despite Sheldon usually being stubborn, he wouldn't let his friends, or even Moss, get in a situation where they'd die. In Pac-Man, if they agree to a tactic, he'll probably follow through, even if before the battle he has to spend hours convincing everyone that his plan is the way to go. Sheldon isn't so stubborn to the point that he'd let anyone lose their life. He understands the situation, and while he may sabotage Moss in some ways, I doubt they'd be in a way where Moss could actually die. It'd be more so in an inconvenient way. Something that cost Moss a couple points. In the end, I think Sheldon Cooper just has all the qualities necessary to get a higher score than Moss in this contest.
Galaxy Grudge Match. Galaxy Grudge Match. There are our arguments. Now it's your turn.
Take your spot in the comment section below, and tell us who you think can outwit the other. Check back in for part 2 if you've got a positive can-do attitude.